used to think control would sound controlling. I thought it would arrive loudly, with obvious rules, obvious anger, obvious selfishness. I thought manipulation would feel like pressure from the first sentence. What I did not understand then is that some of the most dangerous pressure arrives dressed as partnership. It says we, it says future, it says I just need reassurance. And by the time you realize that reassurance only ever seems to flow one direction, you are already standing in a conversation where your safety has somehow become the obstacle to someone else's love. My name is Samira. I was 31 when I understood the difference between being chosen and being cornered. At that point, I had been with Daniel for 5 years. He was 32, funny in public, steady in the way people admire, and very good at sounding reasonable while saying something that made my stomach go cold. We met at a friend's housewarming, started dating 6 months later, and built the kind of relationship other people described as mature. No dramatic breakups, no endless blocking and unblocking, no social media war. We looked stable. That matters, because stability is one of the easiest disguises bad dynamics ever get. I had a daughter, Lena, from my first marriage. She was 12 when this happened, and almost every major decision in my adult life had been filtered through one private question. Will this make her safer or less safe? The house mattered because of that. It was mine before Daniel. A narrow brick house on a quiet street with sycamore roots lifting the sidewalk in little stubborn waves. It had needed everything when I bought it. New pipes, roof patching, 2 dangerous steps in the back, a kitchen that looked exhausted. I bought it anyway, back when everyone in my family thought I was reckless for taking on a renovation, with a child and a full-time job. Maybe I was reckless, but I was also tired of living inside other people's uncertainty. So I worked. I refinished floors after Lena went to bed. I painted trim on weekends. I said no to vacations, random luxuries, and 100 little comforts because I wanted one big comfort instead, a front door that nobody could take from us because a relationship had changed shape. By the time Daniel moved in, the house no longer looked like a rescue project. It looked settled, warm, intentional, alive. He said that was one of the things he loved about me, that I built things, that I knew how to make a home feel like a landing place. He owned a smaller place across town, a compact townhouse he had kept as a rental once he moved in with us. For years, that arrangement seemed straightforward. His place brought in money. Mine was where we lived. No one was forced. No one was cornered. No one was pretending that romance erased math. Whenever the subject of marriage came up, Daniel liked to speak in principles. He would say he did not want to rush. He would say he took marriage seriously. He would say when we made that choice, he wanted it to be forever. If I asked whether he saw children in our future, he answered with a softer version of maybe. Not no, never a clean no. Just a kind of careful fog that always left me doing interpretation work, while he kept the power of vagueness. That should have bothered me sooner. Instead, I translated it as caution. I told myself that measured men were safer than impulsive ones. I told myself that consistency mattered more than speed. I told myself that 5 years together meant we were moving, even if we were moving slowly. Then his tenants moved out. That is when the temperature changed. At first, it looked like logistics. He mentioned repairs, showings, the market, whether he should sell now or hold for another year. I listened, asked questions, and assumed this was still his decision to make about his property. I did not understand that he was quietly turning his sale into a test for me. The first strange conversation happened on a Tuesday. Lena was at a school event. We were eating leftovers at the kitchen island, and Daniel said, very casually, "I've been thinking, if we're serious, we should probably stop living in a house that only belongs to one of us." I remember blinking at him because the sentence was so polished it felt rehearsed. I asked what he meant. He said he meant that if he sold his townhouse, there was no point keeping my place either. We should sell both, pool the equity, and buy something together, a real family home, a symbol of commitment, a clean step into the next chapter. It was the phrase symbol of commitment that made me sit straighter. Not because buying together is strange. It isn't. Plenty of couples do it joyfully. But joy has a different texture than what I heard in his voice. Joy invites. This felt evaluative. I asked, "What is wrong with the home we already live in?" He laughed once, as if I had missed the emotional point on purpose. "Nothing is wrong with it. It's just not ours," I said. "You live here? Lena lives here. I live here. A home can be shared without everybody's name being on a new mortgage." He leaned back, folded his arms, and gave me the expression he used when he wanted to appear patient with my failure to agree quickly. "That's exactly the issue," he said. "You can always fall back on, 'This is your house.' I want to know we're actually building something equal." Equal, another beautiful word people sometimes use when they mean access. I asked him what equality had looked like for the last 2.5 years, while he collected rent from a property he alone owned and lived in a fully renovated home that I had paid to stabilize long before he arrived. He said that was different. He said this was about the future. He said he could not fully relax in a house that would never feel like his. He said it made him hesitant about the bigger steps. "Which bigger steps?" I asked, though I already knew. He said, "Marriage, another child, actually committing for real." There it was, not a conversation, a trade structure. I felt my whole body go still. I asked him, very carefully, if he was saying that after 5 years together, a child I was raising in front of him, and a home we had already built a routine inside, he still could not decide whether he wanted a future with me unless I liquidated the one thing that protected me if he changed his mind. He hated that wording immediately. You could see it. Not because it was inaccurate, but because it stripped the romance from the leverage. "That's not fair," he said. "I'm asking you to trust me." I said, "No. You're asking me to make it expensive not to trust you." That was the first time. His face hardened. The conversation ended there, but only officially. In reality, that conversation moved into everything. For the next week, he raised it in fragments. While folding laundry. While driving. While scrolling listings he thought I might like. He began speaking as though the move already existed, and my job was simply to stop resisting it. He sent me links to larger kitchens, finished basements, better school districts, more yard, more driveway, more this, more that. What he did not send was a single answer to the question that actually mattered. Why does our future only become real after I give up the one asset that keeps me and my daughter secure? When I pressed, he pivoted. He said I was making everything transactional. He said I was holding on to independence in a way that prevented intimacy. He said I wanted the benefits of commitment without the vulnerability of it. That line almost got me. Because women are trained in 100 subtle ways to feel guilty for protecting ourselves too well. As if being prudent is a failure of tenderness. As if safety means you are not all in enough. I spent one whole evening wondering whether I was the problem. Wondering whether divorce had made me too practical, too defensive, too attached to exits. Wondering whether love sometimes does require an irrational leap, and whether I had become the kind of person who could no longer jump. Then I told my friend Noor everything. Not the polished version. The real version. The part where he had spent years keeping marriage and children fuzzy, and suddenly attached clarity to the sale of my house. The part where he spoke about equality, only when my equity became useful. The part where he seemed less interested in proposing to me than in restructuring my options. Noor was quiet for a long second. Then she said, "Samira, this is not a dream he is sharing with you. This is a condition he is placing on you." I started crying immediately, which embarrassed me, because I had not known that was the sentence I needed. A condition. Yes, that was it. Not a milestone, not a romantic next step. A condition. Once I saw that, other details started rearranging themselves. I remembered how often Daniel liked agreements that gave him maximum flexibility, and me maximum exposure. How often he spoke warmly about forever, while keeping every irreversible choice just one conversation out of reach. How often I left serious discussions feeling as if I had somehow asked for too much by wanting a straightforward answer. Then came Sunday. I did not know, until then, that he had been privately preparing for a showdown. He made coffee. He spoke too calmly. He waited until Lena went to her friend's house. And then he sat across from me at the same kitchen island where I had once imagined a proposal might happen. Instead, he gave me a deadline. He said the market was moving. He said he needed clarity. He said he could not keep investing in a relationship with someone who refused to fully join him. He said if I would not agree to list the house, then he had to accept that I was choosing the house over him. Then he said the sentence that ended everything for me. He said, with or without you, I'll be married within a few years. The real question is whether you want to be that person for me. I think he meant it as pressure, as scarcity, as proof that he still had options and I should be careful not to waste mine. What it sounded like, in that instant, was replaceability. 5 years. A child who knew his routines. A home where his shoes sat by my door. Holidays. Family dinners. Shared grocery lists. Shared friends. Shared fatigue. Shared ordinary life. And he wanted me to understand that if I did not transfer enough risk to myself, he could simply locate another woman for the role. That was the moment my fear broke. Not my love, my fear. Because fear had been doing most of the heavy lifting by then. Fear of starting over. Fear of being judged. Fear of admitting that a long relationship can still be the wrong one. Fear that practicality might leave me lonely. But when someone tells you, plainly, that your position in their life is contingent on how much leverage you surrender, fear loses some of its glamour. I asked him to repeat himself. He did. Slower. As if clarity would finally make me compliant. So I said, no, the real question is why marriage only becomes possible once I make myself easier to trap. He looked stunned, then offended, then righteous. He said trap was a disgusting word. He said he had done nothing but try to build a future. He said any good relationship requires sacrifice. He said I was twisting his intentions because I did not know how to trust. And there it was again. The oldest trick in these stories. Take a woman's pattern recognition and rename it damage. Take her caution and rename it bitterness. Take her boundary and rename it fear. I did not yell. That is one of the details I am proud of. I just told him the truth. I said if he wanted marriage, he could have pursued marriage without tying it to a sale. If he wanted a child, he could have decided whether he wanted a child without first requiring me to blend the roof over my daughter's head into a joint asset. If he wanted a home that felt shared, he could have approached that desire like a partner, not a banker setting terms. Then I said, I think you don't want commitment, I think you want collateral. That landed. You could see it land. He stood up so quickly his chair scraped hard against the floor. He accused me of making him sound predatory. He said he had wasted years on someone who would never let him in fully. He said if I would not bend, then there was nothing left to discuss. I remember looking at the doorway, at the hooks where Lena's school bag hung, at the bowl of keys, at the small repaired crack in the tile that I had learned to fix myself, and feeling something inside me settle. Not happily, not dramatically, just settle. I said, you're right. There isn't. He moved out over the next 2 days. Not graciously, not terribly either. Mostly in that irritated, self-justifying way people have. When reality refuses to follow the version of the conflict they already wrote in their head. He told one mutual friend that I loved my house more than I loved him. He told another that I had too much baggage to build a real future. He told his sister that I was impossible to reassure. The comments from the people who cared about me were almost comically consistent. They did not say, maybe you should have compromised. They said, he wanted control. They said, he wanted your equity. They said he kept moving the finish line. They said a committed man does not need a Sunday ultimatum to decide whether you are worth marrying. That mattered. Not because strangers or friends should decide your life for you, but because sometimes outside voices help restore the scale of something that has been distorted by living inside it too long. For weeks afterward, I kept walking through the house, expecting to feel grief first. And I did feel grief. Of course I did. I missed the habit of him. I missed the easy jokes. I missed the version of the future I had spent years sketching in my head. But underneath the grief was a quieter emotion I had not expected so soon. Relief. Relief that I had not explained myself a few minutes longer and talked my way out of my own clarity. Relief that I had not mistaken urgency for depth. Relief that Lena would never learn, from watching me, that love is supposed to cost you your strongest ground first. A month later, I sat at the back steps with a mug of tea and watched late light move across the yard. The fence still needed repainting. The basil had gone wild in its pot. A screen door still clicked too sharply when it shut. Nothing cinematic. Just evidence that ordinary safety is sacred precisely because it is ordinary. That is what Daniel never understood. He thought the house was a symbol, an ego problem, a thing to be exchanged so he could feel chosen loudly enough. But to me, it was more than square footage. It was labor made visible. It was protection with a mailbox. It was every exhausted decision I had made in favor of stability. It was the proof that love should enter a life without requiring demolition first. If he had come to me honestly, with excitement, with a concrete shared plan, with marriage already chosen, with parenthood already discussed clearly, with terms that did not ask my daughter and me to assume more risk for his comfort, maybe that conversation would have been different. But that is not the conversation he brought. He brought an ultimatum, then wrapped it in romantic language and waited to see whether I would confuse surrender for devotion. I did not. And that, more than anything, is why I can tell this story now without shame. Because the ending was not that I lost a man. The ending was that I recognized the invoice hidden inside his promise before I paid it.
Thank you for watching. If this story pulled you in, do me one favor. Hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so the next one finds you the moment it drops. Remember, nothing is ever just what it seems. See you on the next one.